So we've just passed International Women's Day, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about contemporary third wave feminism in the Western context. This is something I've spoken about in quite a number of videos because I think it's very dominant in society. It's one of the hallmarks of identity politics, but more so than other demographics, it's about half the population, women. And it's the old battle of the sexes that really comes into the core of this. So what I really want to raise a few questions, I guess. How relevant is feminism in contemporary Western democracies? I think that open-minded people don't really have any contention with there being a very clear case for women's rights in parts of the world where there is just no rights for women, or very, very few. Country like Afghanistan, for example, parts of Africa where women have been brutally used as weapons of war. Um, it's very clear that women are persecuted around the world. Now, to be honest, in a lot of those countries, there's a generally bad state of human rights, and men are also persecuted, though not as much. But it's a generally regressive state of human rights. I mean, in Afghanistan, for example, it's well known that women were beaten if they didn't wear the full burqa, while men were also punished if they didn't have a beard. But without question, there are many, many examples of women being persecuted around the world for being women. And there are many examples of women having it harder than men. Um, but I think this becomes a very controversial question in the Western context, or it should be a controversial question, because if we look at the history of feminism, first wave feminism, embodied by the suffragettes, was very much about basic rights. It was about basic empowerment, the vote. Second wave feminism, as exemplified by cases such as the Maid for Dagenham case, also carried a lot of merit. The third wave feminism, I think it would be wrong to say it's totally irrelevant and totally void, because there are things that are brought up that I don't think you can say have no basis in fact. So, for example, the Women's March is based on a culture, is based on standing up against a culture of sexual harassment by men in positions of power. That's not without basis. But the flip side of that is there are also many women who are perfectly happy to have went along with it and are now complaining. And I think there has been a bit of a backlash against Me Too for that reason. But I um I really dislike how feminism has sort of become tribal to a point where those who promote it don't seem to be capable of any sort of introspection, or rather hearing any other point of view. I find there's a tunnel vision with feminists. Now, people will say, oh, but you can't lump all feminists together, and that's true. I personally know women who are feminists and they're absolutely not man haters. I don't believe all feminists are. I know women who are feminists who are reasonable people, and they also, to their credit, recognize there are double standards. But I have to say, I consider them to be a minority of third wave feminists. I do believe that the movement is embodied by a deep animosity towards men in general. And it's one of these things, it's like people who join blood and soil nationalist type groups will insist they're not racist. But if you push them on it, they actually do have quite hostile thoughts. The feminists individually may not hate men, but they're endorsing a movement that is, in my view, very misandric, and not enough feminists speak out against that. So feminists can't really complain about feminism getting a bad image if they're not prepared to call out the man haters in their midst. It's like any movement. If you don't confront the more unsavory aspects of a movement that you associate yourself with, you can't complain about that movement getting a bad image. So, am I against feminism? No, I'm not. I'm not against the principle of feminism because it's a very worthy principle, equality for women. I mean, unless you're a sexist, you're not going to be against that. So I'm often against the principle of feminism. But I do have a problem with how feminism today approaches things. And I'm talking here particularly about the Western context because I think it's a totally different um, context in other parts of the world. I just don't think there's any kind of equivalency to be made. I mean, in Western countries, women have absolutely the same legal rights as men. So, working with that context, I judge feminism for what it is. And overwhelmingly, it seems to be about male bashing. It seems to be about constantly promoting a victimhood narrative that this big, overbearing patriarchy is trying to keep women down. I mean, we'll hear about how parliaments are dominated by men, but we won't hear about the fact that the majority of inmates are also men, and the majority of high risk jobs are held by men. You know, why do feminists never mention those things? There is inherently double standards within feminist narrative. I remember I put that issue about women in prison on my timeline, and some feminists I'm connected with got really, they it really worked them up. They were like, oh, that's not what feminism is about. No feminist believes women shouldn't go to prison, etc. But actually, there are feminists who campaign for women to get more lenient sentences. And to those feminists who say that that's not what we're all about, well, why are you being silent? Why are you not criticizing those women who do campaign on precisely that, for women to get lenient treatment? You know, you can't demand equality but not equal responsibility. Another very, I think, good example of this is in politics. I think there are women in politics who do get abuse that is sexist orientated. I mean, there's been examples of prominent women MPs and they've reported rape threats, for example, on Twitter. Now, that is disgusting. And no reasonable person would even try to condone that, no matter what you think of the MP in question. As an example, Jess Phillips. Now, I don't particularly care for Jess Phillips. I think she is the sort of feminist that I'm talking about that gives feminism a bad name. But it doesn't condone rape threats, if that's true. I mean, that's disgusting. So, yes, there is specific abuse against women MPs, but male MPs also get abuse. And I think that there's another side to that. I think many women in politics, and I'm not saying everyone, but many women in politics, frankly, do use the sexism card, i.e., a man disagrees with them, and it's immediately, oh, he's talking down to me because I'm a woman. So that leads to the question, well, if it's a case of civility, that's fine, but call for it across the board. Don't make it out like it should be because I'm a woman. How about calling for civility towards your male colleagues as well? I just don't buy that there are male MPs who bully women because they're women. Why? Because I think they would be roasted by the media if they did. And they know that. There's blatant double standards whereby male MPs have been reprimanded by the Speaker for using parliamentary language towards women MPs and language that could be seen as patronising. And yet, women MPs aren't remanded for the same thing. It's fine for them to be rude to men. Everyday sexism is another one we hear about. What about everyday sexism towards men? Look at the way men are depicted in ads these days. It's almost always as bumbling idiots. But men are far less likely, in my view, to go out with, picket and demand an end to the anti male sexism. I've personally experienced everyday sexism in the sense that, I've been in a shop a while back and the woman cashier said, "Oh, you men don't know how to pack." Now, the point here is she meant it in a light-hearted way, and I took it at face value for what it was. But I could very easily be getting very angry and uptight about that and saying, "Oh, she's a sexist." Imagine a male cashier saying that to a woman. The thing is, it should be trivial, but feminists make these things into, they love to stir up a storm in a teacup, and thereby foster divisions. I know that there is misogyny in society. I know that some men do treat women with disrespect. I've seen young men talking about women in a way that I have no respect for, that I find very tasteless. And I've seen young guys. I remember going to a boxing club a few years ago, and the young guy that went with me asked if because a female friend of mine had come along, a young Chinese woman, she'd come to support me. Well, actually, she was interested in the sport. She just wanted to see what it was all about. And she wanted to watch me training because she just wanted to know what it involved. And so I said, "Yeah, that's fine, no problem. You could watch, but yeah." Anyway, one of the young guys who was with me said, "Oh, is that your bitch?" Now, that's the sort of attitude and thing that I think doesn't do us men good. So yeah, there are some young men in particular who do have a disrespectful attitude to women. By the way, for the record, she wasn't a girlfriend, she was just a friend. But that's beside the point. I mean, you just have to look at. Well, here's an interesting thing. Why are feminists so silent about the rap industry and drill music and all that whole genre? There seems to be far more outrage against what are pretty trivial comments compared to the rampant misogyny that can be seen in the R&B industry. So there's also a lack of consistency. But let me just close with this thought. If you are approaching feminist ideology, if you see yourself as a feminist and you're approaching it whereby every time a man disagrees with you, you're going to get uptight and say it's because I'm a woman, how can you expect to have any sort of communication? And with the Me Too movement, how are men ever expected to approach dating if they're thinking, well, I'm going to be accused of something if I even asked a woman this question? I think there is a responsibility for us men to call out sexism when we see it, anti female sexism, to acknowledge that it exists, and, to condemn violence against women. It's important. But I absolutely will not pander to this idea that you have to call yourself a feminist and pander to this notion that you have to agree with feminists 100%, otherwise, you don't believe in women's rights. It's absolute nonsense. If I disagree with a feminist, I'm not going to be shamed into silence because I'm a man, because I'm mansplaining, i.e., disagreeing. It's just nonsense. Feminists need to understand if they keep putting up these tunnel vision barriers where you can't even have dialogue without being presented as patronizing or mansplaining, then the battle of the sexes is going to continue, and that's really sad because the majority of men like women, and the majority of women like men. There's really no reason for this animosity to exist, but feminists stoke it, and so do certain men. I came across a DJ the other day, just to show the other side of this. Tom Likas is a California based shock jock. He is the sort of prick that gives men a bad name. For those who know him, you'll know who I'm talking about. Some of you might even be fans of him. I don't think he's an asset to men. I think definitely there needs to be more focus on men's issues, and there has been a trickle of that coming through. I'll get back to Lycus in a minute, but when we have a department for women and equality, that should be the Department of Equality. If they really are dealing with men's issues as well, i.e., much higher rates of suicide, higher incarceration, and so on, then that department should be renamed the Department of Equality. If I was Prime Minister, I absolutely would, because it just sends out the wrong message, even if it is genuinely addressing men's issues as well. And when we're dealing with issues like domestic violence, domestic abuse, there needs to be a lot more focus on the manipulative abuse that a lot of women are capable of, for example, in child custody battles. But getting back to Tom Likas, this guy, his attitude to women absolutely stinks. He's entirely looks motivated. If you listen to his videos, well, a lot of fanboys get there and they praise him. But, he's the sort of guy that does give men a bad image. And that's where feminists, they can look at that and say, this is the sort of sexism we're facing. And they're right to point out the likes of him. And some people might wonder, why do I not call myself a masculist? Because I believe that men's rights need more attention. The reason I don't call myself a masculist is because I feel it would be getting into the same sort of tribalism that I dislike about feminism. It's not that I don't think there is a case for men's rights to be raised, but I think both women's rights and men's rights can be brought about by egalitarianism. So I call myself an egalitarian because I believe in standing up for men's rights, women's rights, human rights in general, and I believe in equal opportunity for women, and I speak out in defense of women, and I find violence against women and abuse of women absolutely repugnant. But I don't call myself a feminist for all the reasons I've said. I don't call myself a masculist for the same reason. I also think certain MRAs, frankly, are doing the very thing that feminists do. They say women in general as the enemy because there are bad women out there, because there are manipulative women, and because they've had a bad experience, maybe some wife or girlfriend who's, taken their money or whatever. They then think all women are like that. We need to stop looking at the entire other half of the planet as the other. Yes, men or women are different, and that's beautiful in the sense that opposites attract. But yin yang. But we need to unite humanity, and this battle of the sexes is just tedious. Just for the record, I've nothing against women raising concerns about women's rights. That really isn't the issue here, but it's about the never-ending male shaming, which so encompasses feminism these days. All that does is polarize men. Sure, there'll be a small number of men who are just subservient to feminism, but there's plenty of other men like myself who are sympathetic to some of the issues that are raised, but we don't like the way it is done by male shaming, aka the Gillette ad. In other words, I will speak out against sexual harassment, but I'm not going to thank feminists for saying you men are the problem.